World War III may have already begun, but it didn't start with tanks or missiles. It started in 2020, in silence behind closed doors, when the entire world went into quarantine. We thought the danger was the virus, but the real danger was what it left behind inside us. A collective PTSD that is now pushing nations toward conflict and could be the hidden trigger for the next world war. The world is on edge. Wars are breaking out, tensions are rising, and nations are pointing weapons at each other. Everyone is asking the same question: why now? Why does it feel like the entire planet is sliding toward world war? The answer may not be where most people are looking. It may not lie in politics or economics. It may lie inside us. The hidden trauma we all suffered during the pandemic is still shaping our world today. We went through a collective PTSD, and that invisible wound is fueling the anger, mistrust, and instability that could push us into global conflict. When COVID-19 struck, billions of people were forced into isolation. Cities became ghost towns, businesses collapsed, and millions lost loved ones. Daily routines vanished, children missed school, and the entire global economy ground to a halt. It was not just disruption, it was psychological shock. According to the World Health Organization, rates of anxiety and depression jumped by 25% in the first year alone. Researchers publishing in The Lancet and BMC Psychiatry reported signs of post-traumatic stress in ordinary people: sleepless nights, explosive anger, constant hypervigilance, and distrust of others. This was not a normal crisis. For the first time in history, almost every person alive experienced the same global shock at the same time. It wasn't just stress, it was trauma. And trauma rewires how we see the world. PTSD makes people hyper-alert, suspicious, and more likely to lash out. On an individual level, it destroys relationships, divides families, and ruins communities. On a global scale, it makes entire societies unstable, leaders impulsive, and nations more willing to escalate instead of compromise. That is why unrest exploded during and after lockdowns. In England, migrant hotels became flashpoints. In places like Liverpool and Orpington, protesters gathered outside hotels housing asylum seekers, demanding they be shut down. In Epping, the Bell Hotel became a rallying point, with angry residents saying they felt ignored and unsafe. Similar protests spread across dozens of towns and cities. The anger was real, but often it was unfocused. People were furious, but not sure who to blame. The government, the migrants, the system. That is what trauma does. It builds pressure that eventually bursts out, often against the wrong target. The same pattern repeated worldwide. Protests over restrictions, riots against governments, demonstrations that turned violent. What looked like political battles were often fueled by something deeper, something psychological. And when this instability spreads from the streets into the halls of power, the consequences are far greater. Politicians under pressure take harder stances. Leaders who feel cornered become more aggressive. Nations that sense weakness in their rivals push harder. Old disputes flare up again. And in a traumatized world, escalation is easier than compromise. This is why conflicts are multiplying. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza, rising tensions over Taiwan, protests in Europe and the Americas, instability in Africa. None of these wars were created by the pandemic, but the trauma of quarantine poured fuel on every flame, turning disputes into crises and crises into wars. History gives us a warning. After World War I, millions of soldiers returned with what was then called shell shock, what we now know as PTSD. Entire nations were traumatized, and that trauma fed anger, extremism, and the rise of authoritarian leaders. That collective wound helped pave the way to World War II. Trauma unhealed does not disappear, it festers. And when it festers across entire societies, it can change the course of history. Today we stand at a similar crossroads. Imagine billions of people living with unresolved PTSD. Every headline about inflation, every housing shortage, every new crisis adds another layer of fear and mistrust. Social divisions grow wider. Governments lose credibility. International relations strain under the weight of suspicion and anger. The global system is stretched thin, and the smallest spark could ignite something catastrophic. This is how world wars begin. not with a single cause, but with a world already on edge, ready to explode. The pandemic did not create every problem we face, but it made every problem worse. It left us more fragile, more divided, and more volatile. The unspoken truth is this: the world is not only facing political and economic crises, it is facing a psychological one. Until we recognize this collective trauma, until we deal with the wounds we all carry, the risk of global war will only grow. But there is still hope. Trauma does not have to lead to destruction. It can also lead to renewal. If we face it, if we invest in healing, in rebuilding trust between people and between nations, then we can step back from the edge. History shows that societies that acknowledge their wounds can emerge stronger, united by survival. The first step is acknowledgement. The second step is action, investment in mental health resources, open discussion of trauma, and support for communities struggling to recover. On the global stage, it means cooperation instead of isolation, diplomacy instead of aggression. Healing minds is just as important as rebuilding economies. We are not doomed to repeat the cycle of fear and violence. If we confront our invisible scars, we can prevent future wars, restore trust, and rebuild a more resilient world. The pandemic left us wounded, but not broken. The choice before us is clear. We can allow our trauma to push us into world war, or we can use it as a turning point, a chance to create unity instead of division, healing instead of destruction. The world is on edge, but it does not have to fall.